Alger, the SideQuest Gamer here, and I have a question for you guys. Have you ever played a game that was praised as a classic and one of the decade-defining games of its time, and when you played it, it wasn't the classic that everybody praised it to be? Well, that was Earthworm Jim for me, at first. But upon closer inspection, while it's not my kind of game, I can see why people love it so much.
Now, Earthworm Jim is by no means a bad game, don't get me wrong. Sure, it has its fair share of flaws, but it's actually a pretty well-crafted game for the most part. Do I like it? Well, to be honest, I don't love it. I mean, hype can kill a game for people. Heck, hype can kill any type of media, so many people are now hopping aboard the Frozen hate train because people called it the best Disney movie ever, making people rush to get a Blu-ray copy, only to find it's just another Disney princess movie, only in CG. Earthworm Jim is a rather grotesque run-and-gun platformer developed by Shiny Entertainment, originally released on the Sega Genesis but later ported onto other systems. While there aren't any differences between the versions, some fans pointed out that the SNES version missed layers of animation but had better music, while the Genesis version had more frames of animation but the music is inferior.
Now, as for the best version of Earthworm Jim, you can either download the HD version on PS3 or Xbox 360, or get it on Sega CD or PC. Those versions are great because they have the most frames of animation and the best sounding music out of all the other versions. The music probably sounds better due to being on CD-based media rather than cartridge. Whatever version you happen to get your hands on, whether it be on the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, or the versions I mentioned, those are all great versions to have. But do not get the Game Boy Advance version or the iOS version because those versions are terrible. Trust me, do not get them.
But a lot of versions of Earthworm Jim are either missing parts of levels or omitting entire levels completely. Even the HD version of Earthworm Jim on Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation Store, while they added entirely new levels, they also subtracted one or more of the existing levels. But all versions play great, well except for the portable versions I mentioned earlier. But most notable thing about Earthworm Jim is it's known for its cartoonish graphics. The graphics look so great and the style is kind of grotesque, but not in a bad way. It's actually fully intended. And the visuals still hold up surprisingly to this day, to the point where it could pass as a modern indie game, since indie games are pretty much adopting this cartoonish style. Part of the charm of Earthworm Jim is the rather gross nature, from fighting a junk man who coughs out slugs to bungee jumping with a sentient booger. This game does not take itself seriously and purposely parodies gaming in the 90s, especially in terms of story. The story involves a typical earthworm named Jim who found a spacesuit that fell from the sky, along with a propulsion unit, and as a result he became anthropomorphic. So Earthworm Jim takes the propulsion unit and uses it to go into space to rescue Princess What's-Her-Name from the evil Queen Slug-For-A-Butt.
This is not a joke. That is their actual characters' names. And let me tell you, this game can be really funny. It's really a satire on games in the 90s in general. But the style is so grotesque, it must have made parents in the 90s roll their eyes whenever their hyperactive kids pop the cartridge in the Super Nintendo or Genesis.
Now in terms of gameplay, like I said before many times, it's a run-and-gun game, kind of like Contra, but a lot more emphasis on some tricky platforming and some level gimmicks. But the gun is used a lot in the game, and the bosses sure take a lot of ammunition. But it's 1994 and the game doesn't have a save system, unfortunately, nor a password system, so this game has to be beaten in one sitting, which is one of the features that dates this game. I'm not sure if Earthworm Jim HD has this problem, but it can get really annoying. Now I know this was perfectly acceptable in the 80s, but this is 1994. They should have at least included a password system, but even in 1994, passwords were going out of style. Another thing that dates this game is the fact that you have to memorize the level layout, or you will die a lot in the game. In fact, don't expect to beat this game on your first playthrough. This game can be hard, especially to the newcomer, no matter what difficulty you set it on. The music is very twangy and choppy on the Genesis version, and while not bad, it still dates the game because while games like Sonic the Hedgehog had music that's still catchy and exhilarating to this day, Earthworm Jim's music is kind of stuck in the 90s. None of the tracks in the game were really stuck in my head at all, and to be honest, the music is not masterful, but it's decent. I'll take it for what it is. So the game really didn't age that well, to be honest. Sure, the game is still visually stunning, but keep in mind graphics are not the only thing that dates a game. You have to ask yourself whether the game would get away with some of its flaws if it were made, say, this year as opposed to the 90s. Would it still get A's across the board like it did back then? If not, then that's when you know a game didn't age that well. And while it's really not a criticism of the game, it's just background information I have to put out there for the new generations of gamers out there. Because like I said, the level design is very interesting, but it can be very frustrating at times, especially because my main gripe with the game is that the camera is zoomed in a little too close to Earthworm Jim, making incoming enemies hard to see. It would be nice if the camera zoomed out a bit so I could expect what obstacles are ahead of me, especially for the final level with all those darn spikes. So this game I wouldn't say aged that well, but that doesn't mean it's not worth experiencing, especially for the new generation. But this review only applies to the cartridge version, so get the HD version on Xbox Live or PlayStation Network, because even if it's missing a bonus level, it has 3 new levels, and it does fix some of the issues I've had, but not the level layout. You still have to memorize that. So overall, I would give this game a 74 out of 100, which is still in the green because it's a very addicting game that you'll spend many weekends playing. It's not the classic I was hoping it would be, but for a first entry, it's not bad at all. I did hear that the sequel is far superior, but I can't make that call yet. I'll get to that game later. Even though the game was kind of overhyped for me, but I kind of liked it, and Earthworm Jim is one of the best platformer animal mascots to come out of the 90s during the platformer mascot wars.
Well, I gotta be honest, I prefer the Rocket Knight games over the Earthworm Jim games, but they're both great game series. But be sure to tune in next month as I take a look at a rather infamous platformer mascot from the 90s that, like Earthworm Jim, was also multi-platform. Until next month, thank you so much for watching, and remember to stay awesome.